When you picture a Roman feast, maybe you imagine mountains of food, goblets of wine, and nobles lounging on couches while musicians play, and you'd be right. But only partly. Because Roman banquets weren't just about eating. They were displays of wealth, bizarre rituals, and sometimes shocking behavior that blurred the line between celebration and excess. These gatherings were where power was flaunted, alliances forged, and appetites indulged to extremes that would leave us stunned today. Writers like Seneca and Petronius mocked their extravagance, describing scenes that sound almost unbelievable. But to the Romans, this was normal, a stage where food, politics, and ritual collided. In this video, we're counting down 10 shocking customs of Roman banquets and feasts. From flamingo tongues and peacock brains to vomiting mid-meal and even dining with the dead, these traditions reveal a side of Rome that's as fascinating as it is unsettling. Stick around until number 1, because the strangest tradition of all might just change the way you picture ancient dining forever. 10. Feasts as displays of power. Banquets in Rome weren't just dinner parties. They were political theater. Wealthy hosts used them to show off their status, power, and connections. Invitations weren't given lightly. Being invited meant you mattered. Being excluded meant you were invisible. The guest list itself was often more important than the food. Guests reclined on couches arranged in a U-shape, with the most important seated closest to the host. The hierarchy of the room was carefully choreographed. Senators in prime spots, rising politicians placed strategically, and less important figures stuck at the edges. The message was clear: know your place. The food itself was extravagant, not necessarily because it tasted good, but because it was rare and expensive. Exotic spices from India, rare fish from the Black Sea, and fruits imported from North Africa turned the meal into a map of the empire's reach. The host wasn't just feeding you. He was showing you his wealth, his trade connections, and his ability to command resources from across the known world. Imagine being invited to a dinner where the food wasn't about enjoyment, but about proving your host was richer and more powerful than anyone else. Would you feel honored, or like you were just a pawn in a very elaborate show? 9. Flamingo tongues and peacock brains. The Romans were notorious for bizarre delicacies. Among the strangest were flamingo tongues, prized for their rarity, and peacock brains, served as an ultimate status dish. Other menus included dormice, stuffed with pork, jellyfish drizzled in honey, and even exotic fish shipped alive across the empire just for a single evening. These foods weren't chosen for taste. They were about shock value. The rarer and stranger the dish, the more impressive the host appeared. Pliny the Elder and Juvenal complained that Rome had lost its sense of moderation, turning food into a competition for who could serve the most outlandish plate. Some banquets became legendary for their absurdity. The satirist Petronius described a feast where entire dishes were sculpted to look like constellations, with every zodiac sign represented in food. It was dining as performance art. Would you try a flamingo tongue just to impress your friends? Or would you quietly stick to the bread and olives, pretending not to notice the bizarre delicacies around you? 8. Endless wine, endless rules. Wine flowed freely at Roman feasts. But it wasn't as simple as just pouring a glass. The wine was almost always mixed with water, sometimes spiced with honey, pepper, or herbs, and served in carefully controlled rounds. Drinking too much too fast could mark you as uncivilized. Romans prided themselves on moderation, or at least the performance of it. But here's the twist. Hosts sometimes pressured guests into drinking more than they wanted, turning restraint into a trap. The expectation was to keep up, to match toasts, and to flatter the host with enthusiastic participation. Drunkenness could be seen as entertaining, but it could also be used as a weapon to humiliate rivals. A man who embarrassed himself at a banquet might never live it down. Banquets often ended in chaos when restraint slipped. Stories survive of senators stumbling out of feasts, reputations tarnished by too much wine. To the Romans, alcohol was both a social glue and a dangerous test of character. Imagine sitting at a table where every sip of wine was a test of both manners and stamina. Would you pace yourself to survive the night, or risk overindulgence and humiliation? 7. Reclining while eating. Forget chairs. Romans dined lying down. Guests reclined on couches, propped on their left elbows, while eating with their right hands. To us, it might look lazy, but to Romans it was the mark of sophistication. Only slaves, children, and women, in most cases, sat upright. Reclining was the privilege of free men, a literal posture of power. The setup of the couches created intimacy and exclusivity. Picture dozens of guests sprawled side by side, reaching across low tables for bites of meat, bread, or fruit. Servants rushed between them, balancing trays of wine and delicacies. The air was thick with the smell of roasted meat, incense, and sweat. It was indulgence woven with discomfort. For outsiders, the posture could be strange or even unpleasant. Try holding yourself on one elbow for hours while eating with the other. Hardly practical, but deeply symbolic. Dining upright marked you as lesser. Reclining marked you as elite. Would reclining on your side make dining feel luxurious, or just exhausting? 6. The role of entertainment banquets weren't just about food. They often featured musicians, dancers, poets, and even gladiators fighting small matches for entertainment. Some feasts included jugglers, mimes, or shockingly crude performances meant to provoke laughter. The stranger the entertainment, the more memorable the evening. The satirist Juvenal mocked feasts where hosts tried to outdo each other with bizarre spectacles. Like acrobats leaping between courses or exotic animals paraded through the dining hall. Some emperors even turned banquets into private circuses, blurring the line between the dining room and the arena. Imagine eating stuffed dormice while a gladiator fight breaks out beside you, or sipping watered wine as a poet recites verses praising the emperor. To the Romans, excess and variety defined a perfect evening. The weirder, the better. Would you be thrilled by such non-stop entertainment, or would you secretly wish for a little peace and quiet with your meal? Vomiting for more food? One of the most infamous Roman banquet traditions is the so-called vomitorium. Contrary to myth, it wasn't an actual room for throwing up. But ancient writers like Seneca accused Rome's elite of deliberately vomiting mid-feast to make room for more food and drink. Whether this was exaggerated satire or fact, the image stuck. Romans so greedy they purged just to keep eating. The very idea horrified moralists of the time. Seneca condemned it as proof of moral decay, accusing the wealthy of wasting food while the poor starved. Whether or not every elite Roman did this, the fact that people believed it happened shows how deeply excess defined the culture. Picture a dinner where some guests excused themselves, returned, and immediately started eating again. Would you call that dedication to indulgence, or the ultimate proof that wealth had gone to their heads? 4. Guests of honor and guests of shame. At some banquets, not all guests were treated equally. Important guests got the best cuts of meat, the finest wine, and the most comfortable seats. Lesser guests, they might be stuck with scraps, watered-down drinks, or placed in humiliating positions. This wasn't an accident. It was a performance. Some hosts deliberately created tiers of status at their table to reinforce hierarchies. Petronius described feasts where guests openly complained about being served inferior dishes while others feasted on delicacies. It was a cruel but effective reminder of power. Imagine realizing the man beside you got a flamingo tongue while you got a stale crust of bread. Would you laugh it off or stew in humiliation, knowing everyone else could see the difference? In Rome, even the food you were given told the world where you stood. Key. Religious rituals at the table banquets weren't just social events. They were tied to religion. Offerings to household gods often preceded the meal, and certain festivals included feasts dedicated to deities. Wine was poured as libations, and sacred images in dining rooms reminded guests that the gods, too, were part of the evening. Some dining rooms were decorated like temples, complete with shrines and altars. Guests feasted under the gaze of statues of Jupiter, Venus, or the emperor himself. To the Romans, food and piety weren't separate. They were intertwined. Imagine feasting on peacock brains while priests made offerings to Jupiter in the same room. Would it feel holy or deeply unsettling? To us, it might seem odd to mix religion with indulgence, but to Romans, it made perfect sense. The gods deserved a place at the table, no matter how decadent the feast became. 2. Banquets as political weapons. Feasts weren't just about friendship. They were tools of politics. Ambitious Romans used them to win allies, secure favors, and manipulate rivals. To reject an invitation could be seen as an insult. To attend meant you were part of the host's web of influence. Some emperors took this to extremes. Caligula was said to serve food covered in gold leaf, while Nero allegedly staged performances where guests had no choice but to applaud. Banquets became tools of intimidation as much as celebration. Imagine dining at a table where every bite reminded you of the host's dominance, and that refusing food might mean political suicide. Would you feel flattered to be invited, or terrified of what the evening might bring? 1. Banquets of the dead. The strangest Roman feasts of all were those tied to death. During festivals like Parentalia, families gathered at tombs to eat with their ancestors. Bread, wine, and meat were offered to the dead, while the living dined beside graves. To the Romans, the boundary between life and death blurred at the table. A banquet wasn't just for the living, it was for the spirits, too. Children played among tombstones, while parents poured milk into cracks in the earth, convinced their loved ones were dining just beneath them. Imagine raising a glass of watered wine, not just to your friends, but to the silent shades beneath the soil. Would you find comfort in dining with your ancestors, or would every bite taste haunted? Roman banquets were more than just meals. They were theater, ritual, politics, and excess all rolled into one. From reclining couches and bizarre foods to power plays and ghostly feasts, the Roman dining table revealed the empire's obsession with wealth, status, and spectacle. So which of these banquet customs shocked you the most? Would you try a flamingo tongue, recline on a couch, or pour wine for the spirits of the dead? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoyed this dive into Rome's most shocking dining traditions, subscribe to Civilization Deep Dives for more bizarre, fascinating, and immersive stories from the ancient world. Because the deeper you dive, the stranger it gets.